with Ukraine. For Langley Eldergrove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would like to notify you that I will be sharing my time with my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Regina Wascana. The Conservative Party is the party of free trade in Canada. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and President Ronald Reagan signed the first free trade agreement in 1988. There was a lot of resistance at the time. There were a lot of naysayers who were saying things like, oh, we're going to lose our sovereignty as a nation. Or people were saying our agricultural sector won't be able to compete with the warmer states with longer growing seasons. Others were saying that our manufacturing sector is not going to be able to compete fairly against the bigger, more powerful, highly industrialized U.S. economy. And then this one, I remember this one very well. Our wine industry is not going to be able to compete with the wine regions in California. Well, I can assure you, Madam Speaker, that Okanagan Valley wines have just gotten better and better over the intervening years because competition makes us better. We say, bring it on. So now, conveniently, in that free trade election in 1988, conveniently for all the naysayers, the protectionists, the chicken littles who were saying this time the sky really is falling if we're going to remove protective barriers, there was the Liberal Party, where they could park their votes. Their leader at the time, John Turner, said that a free trade agreement with the U.S. would Americanize us. So does that sound familiar? We hear the same today, that the Liberal Party is always fear-mongering about what the Conservatives might do, cozying up too much with the United States. Well, you know, the more things change, the more they're the same. Happily, the Conservatives won the election in 1988, and the free trade agreement, the FTA, became law, came into effect in January 1, 1989. And by all measures, it was a roaring success for both countries. Both Canada and the U.S. were both wealthier and more powerful economies on account of free trade. Because it turns out that Adam Smith and other classical economists were right, that the wealth of nations is built on the ability of free people to trade freely with each other, free countries to be able to trade freely with other countries. Now, the FTA was just the beginning. Soon the Liberals, the great imitators, they too became free traders. And they brought Mexico into the fold under the North American FTA, or the NAFTA as we call it. But it took another conservative government under the leadership of Prime Minister Stephen Harper to bring about an ambitious free trade agenda encompassing many countries around the world, in Europe, in South America, and in the Asia-Pacific region, and of course Ukraine, which is what we're talking about today. In 2015, late in Prime Minister Harper's administration, we entered into a free trade agreement with Ukraine. Now, Canada's relationship with Ukraine is very important, not only because of the 1.3 million Canadian citizens who claim a Ukrainian heritage, but also because of the $500 million of trade annually between our two countries. Now, that's a relatively small amount of money compared to our trade with some other countries, but it is growing, and that's important. And it's also important to recognize that coal is a part of that $500 million. And of course, Ukraine, like many countries in the world, are trying to get off of coal and substituting it for cleaner burning energy. And Canada is conveniently situated for that as well, because we have a lot of natural gas available. It burns much cleaner, and we want to make it available for countries like Ukraine to get off coal, and countries in the Asia-Pacific region as well. But unfortunately, this Liberal government under the current Prime Minister thinks that Canadian natural gas should stay in the ground. Many countries are looking for a reliable supplier for natural gas, and they've come to Canada asking us to come to the table. This includes Germany, who is looking for a way to cut its dependence on Russian natural gas. Yes, that's the Russia that 2 years ago invaded Ukraine in an illegal war and is indiscriminately bombing cities and killing its citizens, and using sale proceeds, the cash that they receive from selling liquid natural gas, to fuel that war. So indirectly, we are now helping President Putin build up his war chest. Canada can be of real value here. What better way to help our Ukrainian friends than to do our part in cutting off Putin's money supply? Now, astonishingly, our Prime Minister told our friends in Europe, sorry, there is no business case for LNG. Unbelievable. The Americans certainly see a business case, and where Canada dropped the ball, they picked it up and ran with it. They are now building LNG export facilities, getting ready and already starting to fill the demand for clean, ethical natural gas for countries that want to get off of coal and get as far away from Putin as possible. Now, our Prime Minister did see a business case relating to the natural gas industry, and that was to actually do business with Mr. Putin himself. Our PM wants to keep Canadian natural gas in the ground, but he delivered a powerful turbine to Putin so that he, Putin, could increase Russian natural gas production for sale to the world. And with that cash, to build up his war machine against Ukraine. Madam Speaker, that's just not what friends do. Canadians are getting tired of this Liberal Party hypocrisy and are looking forward to the day when a common-sense Conservative government will stand up to dictators like Putin and turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people. That's what this Conservative Party stands for. Now, today we're talking about Bill C-57, an act to implement the 2023 Free Trade Agreement between Canada and Ukraine. The existing free trade agreement is now 25 years old and needs to be revisited and updated. We agree with that. But in the meantime, the old agreement, the one negotiated by Prime Minister Harper, is still in place and it is still functioning. Conservative members on the International Trade Committee have been working very diligently to improve this bill that is before the House today, so that we can be in a position to vote on it unanimously, to pass it through. Here are some of the things that the Conservative members on the committee wanted to improve. They wanted to include a commitment from Canada to provide weapons and munitions to help Ukraine in its defense against Putin's illegal invasion, because that's what friends do in a time of war. We want to include a plan to sell Canadian LNG to Europe so that they no longer provide Putin with the cash he needs to fund this illegal war. That's a common sense solution and step forward. And importantly, they also wanted to delete the provision in this revised agreement promoting carbon tax, because we, the Conservatives, want to axe this tax. I'm sure everybody in this House has heard that many times already. We call it the inflationary tax on everything that Canadians don't need, that is ineffective, and that's exactly what we're going to do when we form government after the next election. So sadly, all of these common sense recommendations were voted down by the other parties, and today we now have before us a weaker and inferior product, which we are hoping will still go back to, we were hoping until the vote earlier today, that it would go back to committee for improvement. If I have a minute or so left, I just want to touch very quickly on the history of the Conservative Party supporting Ukraine. I think it's important for people to understand that. Common sense Conservatives under our leader have a long and proud history. We stood with Ukraine when their President Zelensky asked the Prime Minister not to sign an export permit for that gas turbine that I talked about a minute ago. We stood with Ukraine when they asked for a reliable source of weapons and munitions, and we're still waiting for the Liberal government to deliver on that. We stood with Ukraine when we asked the Prime Minister to impose Magnitsky sanctions on Putin and his oligarchs. Our history goes back many years. Conservative government in 1991 became the first Western country to recognize Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. We stood with Ukraine when the Harper government undertook Operation Unifier to provide critical military training to Ukraine, which they appreciated very much. And of course, the agreement that we're talking today, I'd already mentioned that, was negotiated by a Conservative government. So we are very proud of our long-standing relationship with Ukraine, and we'll always stand with them because that is what friends do. Thank you.